Elder Lysara had been sending the emergency signal for 11 days. 11 days of watching her beautiful world burn. 11 days of hiding in underground bunkers while the Krath Dominion ships floated above like dark clouds, stealing her people one by one. The Villani were a peaceful species. Their bodies were thin and delicate, covered in soft blue scales that shimmered like water under moonlight. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. They had built their civilization on art, music, and philosophy. They believed that all conflicts could be solved with words and understanding. The Krath had proven them wrong. The invaders had arrived without warning 3 weeks ago. Their ships had blocked out the sun over the capital city. Their soldiers had marched through the streets with weapons that turned Villani bodies to ash. They did not want to negotiate. They did not want peace. They wanted slaves. Lysara pressed her 3-fingered hand against the cold metal wall of the bunker. Above her, she could hear the distant rumble of Krath transport ships. Each rumble meant more of her people being taken. Each rumble meant more families torn apart. Each rumble meant hope dying a little more. She had sent the distress signal to every species in the galactic community. The Tyranni had responded with sympathy, but explained they could not risk war with the Krath. The Malori had offered prayers. The Vexian collective had simply ignored the message entirely. Only the humans had said they were coming. Lysara had heard stories about humans. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories about humans. They came from a death world called Earth, a planet so dangerous that most species could not survive there for more than a few hours. The gravity was crushing. The weather was violent. The native life forms were designed to kill, but despite coming from such a terrible place, humans were known throughout the galaxy for their kindness. They ran refugee programs for displaced species. They sent medical teams to plague-stricken worlds. They shared their technology freely with anyone who asked. They were the galaxy's helpers, always ready to lend a hand to those in need. Lysara had expected their ships to arrive with diplomats and counselors. She had expected soft words and gentle promises. She had expected the humans to try talking to the Krath, to find some peaceful solution that would make everyone happy. She had not expected what actually happened. On the 12th day, just as the sun began to rise over the burning horizon, the sky tore open. Lysara watched through a tiny window in the bunker as human ships emerged from hyperspace. There were dozens of them, sleek and black and moving in perfect formation like a flock of predatory birds. The Krath reacted immediately. Their communication channels exploded with panicked orders. Their weapon systems powered up. Their ships began to move into defensive positions. The humans did not slow down. They did not announce themselves. They did not demand surrender or try to open negotiations. They simply attacked. Lysara had never seen anything like it. The human ships moved with impossible speed and precision. They struck at the Krath vessels like lightning, hitting critical systems with surgical accuracy. One by one, the Krath ships went dark. Their engines failed. Their weapons went offline. They hung in the sky like dead things. The whole battle took less than 10 minutes. Lysara rushed to the communication console, opened a channel to the human fleet. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Human vessels, this is Elder Lysara of the Villani people. Thank you for answering our call. Please, we need medical assistance. We need food and water. We need someone to help us rebuild. How can we ever repay your kindness? There was no response. She tried again. Human vessels, please respond. We wish to welcome you properly. We wish to thank you for saving us. Still nothing. Through the window, she watched human dropships descend from the fleet. They fell toward the surface in tight groups, their hulls black and featureless. They landed in the ruins of the capital city. Soldiers poured out of them. The soldiers were not what Lysara expected. She had seen images of human aid workers before. They wore bright colors and friendly smiles. They moved slowly and carefully, always making sure not to frighten the species. They were helping. These soldiers wore black armor that covered every part of their bodies. Their faces were hidden behind dark visors. They carried weapons that looked heavy and dangerous. They did not walk slowly and carefully. They moved fast and silent, spreading through the streets like shadows. The surviving Krath soldiers tried to fight back. They set up defensive positions in the ruined buildings. They took Villani civilians as hostages. Holding weapons to their heads, the humans did not stop. Lysara watched in horror. As a group of human soldiers approached a building where Krath warriors were holding 20 Villani hostages, the Krath commander shouted threats through a speaker. He promised to kill every hostage if the humans came any closer. The humans did not negotiate. They did not back away. They did not even acknowledge the threats. They simply breached the building. It happened so fast that Lysara barely saw it. The humans moved through the walls like ghosts. There were flashes of light, sharp sounds, and then silence. When it was over, every Krath soldier in the building was dead. Every single hostage was alive. Lysara tried the communication channel again. "Please, human soldiers, we are grateful for your help, but we do not understand. Why will you not speak to us? Why do you fight with such violence?" Finally, a voice responded. It was deep and flat without any warmth or emotion. "Ma'am, this is Commander Marcus Webb of the Earth Defense Forces. Stay inside. Keep your people in the bunkers. We are not here to talk." "But Commander, the Krath are defeated. Their ships are disabled. Surely now we can begin negotiations for their surrender. Surely now we can find a peaceful way forward." There was a long pause before Webb responded. "Lysara, the Krath had taken over 300 of your people onto their slave processing ships. In approximately 2 hours, those ships will be cleared. Until then, I need you to stay inside and stay quiet. We have work to do." The channel went dead. Lysara turned to the other Villani hiding in the bunker. They were looking at her with wide, frightened eyes. They had been scared of the Krath, but this was something different. This was a new kind of fear. "What are they doing out there?" asked a young Villani named Torin. He was barely an adult, his scales still bright with youth. "Are they saving us or destroying us?" Lysara did not know how to answer. She pressed her face back to the window and watched the human soldiers move through the ruins of her city. They worked in perfect coordination, never speaking, never hesitating. When they found Krath soldiers, they eliminated them without mercy. When they found Villani survivors, they guided them gently toward safe areas. It was the strangest thing Lysara had ever seen. One moment, a human soldier would kill a Krath warrior with cold efficiency. The next moment, that same soldier would kneel down to comfort a crying Villani child, their movements suddenly soft and careful as the sun climbed higher. Lysara began to understand something that made her scales turn pale with realization. The humans had not come to rescue them. Not exactly. They had not come with kindness in their hearts and hope in their eyes. They had not come to negotiate or find peaceful solutions. They had come to hunt. The Krath were not just enemies to be defeated. They were prey to be eliminated. And the humans would not stop until every single one of them was gone. Lysara watched a human dropship rise toward the disabled Krath slave ships. Carrying soldiers in black armor, with weapons ready, for the first time in 11 days, she felt hope. But mixed with that hope was something else. Something cold. Something that whispered a question she was afraid to answer. If these humans could show such terrible violence to their enemies, what would happen if anyone ever made enemies of them? The dropship disappeared into the belly of the nearest slave ship. Lysara held her breath and waited for the screaming to begin. The Villani had expected saviors to arrive with warm smiles and open arms. They had expected gentle beings who would hold their hands and tell them everything would be all right. They had expected kindness. What they got was something else entirely. Elder Lysara stood at the edge of a makeshift medical camp that the humans had set up in the ruins of a park. Around her, Villani survivors sat wrapped in silver blankets, drinking warm liquids from human containers. Human medics moved between them with soft voices and careful hands, treating wounds and offering comfort. But just beyond the camp, Lysara could see human soldiers dragging Krath bodies into neat rows. She could hear the distant sound of gunfire from the far side of the city. She could smell smoke and something else. something sharp and metallic that she did not want to identify. A human medic approached her. Unlike the soldiers, this one had removed her helmet. She was young, with brown skin and dark eyes that held genuine concern. Her name tag reads Santos. Elder Lysara, you should sit down. You have been standing for hours. Let me bring you something to drink. I do not understand, Lysara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I do not understand what your people are doing. Santos looked out at the rows of Krath bodies. Her expression did not change. We are doing what needs to be done, but some of those soldiers tried to surrender. I saw them. They dropped their weapons. They raised their hands. Your soldiers killed them anyway. Santos was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was patient but firm. Have you ever heard of Proxima Station, Elder Lysara? Lysara shook her head. It was a human colony. Mining station, mostly. About 3,000 people lived there. Families, children, workers just trying to make a living in deep space. Santos paused to help a young Villani adjust his blanket. The Krath came to Proxima Station 2 years ago. They said they wanted to negotiate. They said they came in peace. The station commander believed them. He let their delegation come aboard. Lysara felt cold spreading through her scales. What happened? The delegation was not real. They were soldiers pretending to surrender. Once they were inside the station, they opened the airlocks. 3,000 people died in less than a minute. Men, women, children, all of them. The Krath recorded it and broadcast the video across their empire as entertainment. Lysara's three-fingered hand covered her mouth. That is horrible. Yes, it is. And it is not the only time the Krath have used false surrenders. They have done it on 6 different occasions that we know of. They see mercy as weakness, to be exploited. They see kindness as a tool to be used against the kind. Santos looked directly at Lysara. So no, Elder, we do not accept Krath surrenders anymore. We learned that lesson the hard way. From across the camp, a commotion drew their attention. A group of human soldiers was leading Villani survivors out of a transport vehicle. These survivors looked worse than the others. Their scales were dull and cracked. Their eyes were hollow. Some of them could barely walk. These are from the slave ships, Santos explained. The processing had already begun on some of them. Processing. Santos did not answer. She simply walked toward the new arrivals to help. Lysara followed, and what she saw broke something inside her. The Villani from the slave ships bore marks of terrible abuse. Some had burns. Some had cuts that had been left untreated. Some were missing scales and patterns that suggested deliberate removal. A young Villani female collapsed into Lysara's arms. She was shaking so hard that her teeth clicked together. They were going to sell us, the female whispered. They were going to sell us to the fighting pits. They said pretty species like us make the crowds cheer when we die slowly. Lysara held her tight and looked up at the human soldiers standing nearby. They had removed their helmets, and for the first time, she could see their faces. They were not expressions of rage or hatred. They were expressions of cold, quiet determination. One of the soldiers, a tall man with gray hair and scars across his jaw, knelt down beside a Villani child who had been separated from his parents. The child was crying, too scared to move. The soldier reached into a pocket and pulled out something small and colorful. It was a candy wrapped in bright paper. "Hey there, little one," the soldier said softly. His voice was completely different from the harsh commands Lysara had heard earlier. "You are safe now. No one is going to hurt you anymore. Would you like something sweet?" The child hesitated, then slowly reached out and took the candy. The soldier smiled, a gentle expression that transformed his scarred face into something almost fatherly. "There you go. Everything is going to be okay." Lysara watched as the same soldier stood up, checked his weapon, and walked toward a group that was preparing to assault another Krath position. The contrast was so sharp that it made her dizzy. Commander Webb appeared beside her. He was a tall human with short dark hair and eyes the color of steel. His armor was covered in marks that Lysara realized with horror were Krath blood. "Elder Lysara, my soldiers reported that you have been observing our operations." "Oh." "I have. I am trying to understand. Webb nodded slowly. That is fair. Ask your questions. Why? Lysara spread her hands wide. Why do you fight like this? I have heard of humans. I have heard that you are kind, that you help others, that you believe in peace and cooperation. But what I am seeing is not kindness. What I am seeing is ... brutality, Webb offered. Yes. Webb was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the medical camp, at the Villani survivors being treated with such gentle care. Then he looked at the Krath bodies being removed. His expression never changed. Elder Lysara, let me ask you something. If you saw a predator attacking a child, what would you do? I would try to stop it. How? Lysara hesitated. I would call for help. I would try to distract the predator. I would try to lead the child to safety. And if none of that worked, if the only way to save the child was to kill the predator with your own hands, would you do it? Lysara thought about the question seriously. On her world, such violence was almost unthinkable. The Villani had not fought wars in thousands of years. They had evolved beyond such primitive behavior. Or so they had believed. I do not know if I could, she admitted. Humans can, Webb said simply. That is the difference between our species. Elder, when we see innocent people suffering, we see predators hurting those who cannot defend themselves, something inside us changes. We become something else. Something harder. Something capable of doing what needs to be done. But is that not dangerous? Does that not make you as bad as the Krath? Webb actually laughed, though there was no humor in it. No, Elder, it does not. Because when the fighting is done, we stop. We put down our weapons. We wash the blood from our hands. And we go back to being the kind, helpful species that the galaxy knows and loves. He nodded toward the soldier who had given candy to the crying child. That man has killed more Krath today than I can count. Tonight, he will probably cry in his quarters because of what he had to do. Tomorrow, he will read bedtime stories to his daughter over the communication link. That is what makes us different from the monsters we fight. Lysara was still processing. This when a soldier approached and whispered something to Webb, the commander's expression grew even more serious. Elder Lysara, I must go. We have traced the Krath fleet to their origin point. We know where they came from and where they will retreat to. What will you do? Webb began walking toward a waiting dropship. He paused and looked back at her. We are going to follow them home. And we are going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. Lysara felt her scales turn pale. You are going to attack their homeworld? But that will be war. That will be a conflict that could last for years, no, Webb said. It will be quick. We do not want war, Elder. We want this finished. We want to end the Krath threat permanently so that species like yours never have to send desperate signals into the void again. He climbed into the dropship and disappeared inside. The engines roared to life. Lysara made a decision in that moment. She did not fully understand it herself, but she knew it was the right thing to do. Wait. She called out, Take me with you. I need to see this. I need to understand what human justice looks like. There was a long pause. Then the dropship door opened again, and a hand reached out to help her inside. As the ship rose into the sky, Lysara looked down at her ruined world. The Villani would rebuild. They would heal. But they would never be the same. They had learned something that could not be unleered. Sometimes kindness needed teeth. Sometimes compassion required claws. And sometimes, the most loving thing a species could do was become a nightmare for those who preyed on the innocent. The fleet gathered in orbit. One by one, the human ships aligned themselves toward the distant stars where the Krath homeworld waited. Lysara sat in silence and prepared herself to witness something that her peaceful culture had never imagined. She was going to watch humanity go to war. The human ship was called the Resolute, and Elder Lysara had never felt more out of place in her entire life. Everything about the vessels spoke of war. The walls were thick metal, covered in pipes and cables. The floors were hard and cold beneath her feet. The corridors were narrow and efficient, designed for soldiers to move quickly from one place to another. There were no decorations, no art, no beauty of any kind. And yet, the humans who walked these corridors were not the monsters she had expected. She watched a group of soldiers playing cards in a common area, laughing and teasing each other like old friends. She saw a young woman with a shaved head showing photographs of her baby to anyone who would look. She heard music playing softly from somewhere, a strange melody that made her think of rain falling on leaves. These were not killing machines. They were people. People who had chosen to do terrible things so that others would not have to. Commander. Webb found her standing outside the observation deck, staring at the stars streaming past. "We will arrive at the Krath home world in approximately 6 hours," he said. "You should rest." "I cannot rest. I cannot stop thinking about what I have seen. What I am about to see?" Webb nodded slowly. He leaned against the wall beside her, his arms crossed over his chest. Without his helmet, he looked older, tired, human. "You want to know why we are like this?" he said. It was not a question. "Yes, your species confuses me more than any other in the galaxy. You run hospitals and orphanages. You send aid to strangers. You adopt children from species that are not your own and raise them as family. But you also do this?" She gestured at the warship around them. "You build machines of death. You train your people to kill. You attack without warning and without mercy." Webb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had heard it before. "Elder Lasara, let me tell you something about Earth. Our planet is not just dangerous because of the gravity or the weather. It is dangerous because everything there is trying to kill everything else. From the smallest microbe to the largest predator, every living thing on Earth is engaged in an endless war for survival. Humans are no different.
Oh.
But you evolved past that. You built civilizations. You created art and science and philosophy. Yes, we did. But we did not do it by becoming soft. We did it by becoming smart. By learning when to fight and when to cooperate. By understanding that sometimes the most peaceful thing you can do is be capable of extreme violence so that no one ever thinks to test you." Lysara tried to understand. "You are saying that your kindness is possible because of your strength. I am saying that true kindness requires strength. Anyone can be gentle when there is no threat. The real test is whether you can be gentle when you have the power to be terrible." Webb turned to look at her. "We choose to be kind, Elder. It is not our nature. It is our choice. And we make that choice every single day, knowing full well what we are capable of becoming. But the Krath, you show them no kindness at all. The Krath have earned what they are about to receive. They have enslaved dozens of species. They have tortured millions of innocent beings. They have been given chance after chance to change their ways, and they have responded with mockery and cruelty every single time." Webb's jaw tightened. There comes a point when kindness becomes complicity. When mercy becomes permission. The Krath crossed that line long ago. A soldier approached and saluted. "Commander, we are receiving long-range scans of the target system. Show me." They walked to the bridge together. Lysara followed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fascination. The bridge was a circular room filled with screens and consoles. Every surface covered with tactical displays and data readouts. On the main screen, the Krath homeworld appeared. It was a dark planet, almost black, with red storms swirling across its surface. Surrounding it were hundreds of ships, from small fighters to massive battle cruisers. And orbiting the planet itself were dozens of space stations. "Those are slave processing facilities," Webb explained grimly. "The Krath bring captured species there to be sorted, broken, and sold." Lysara felt sick. "How many beings are on those stations?" "Our intelligence suggests approximately 2 million slaves from at least 30 different species." 2 million. The number was too large to comprehend. "What will happen to them when the battle begins?" Lysara asked. Webb smiled, and for the first time, there was warmth in it. "Elder Lysara, what makes you think the battle has not already begun?" He pointed to a section of the display. Lysara looked closer, and saw small dots moving toward the slave stations. They were so tiny that she had missed them completely. We sent infiltration teams ahead 3 days ago. They have been working their way through the station's security systems, disabling failsafes, unlocking cells, and preparing escape routes. By the time our main fleet engages, every slave on those stations will have a clear path to the evacuation ships we have hidden in the asteroid belt. Lysara stared at him. You've planned all of this? Before you even arrived at our world. We have been watching the Krath for years, Elder. We knew this day would come eventually. We just needed the right moment. His expression hardened. They gave us that moment when they attacked Sanctuary Prime. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Chaos erupted. Lysara watched from the observation deck as human ships spread across the system like a wave. The Krath responded immediately, their vessels moving to intercept. Weapons fire lit up the darkness of space, brilliant flashes of light that would have been beautiful if they were not so deadly, but the humans did not head for the Krath warships. Instead, they went straight for the slave stations. What are they doing? Lysara asked a nearby officer. They are ignoring the enemy fleet. The officer, a young man with red hair and freckles, grinned. That is the point, ma'am. The Krath think we are here to conquer. They think we want their planet. They are wrong. We do not want anything from them. We just want to take away everything they have stolen. On the screen, Lysara watched human shuttles dock with slave stations. She watched Krath defenders being cut down as human soldiers breached the facilities. She watched thousands of aliens of all shapes and sizes being guided to evacuation ships, their chains broken, their cells opened. The Krath fleet tried to stop the evacuation. They fired on the shuttles, not caring that they might hit their own stations. They sent boarding parties to recapture the escaping slaves. They did everything they could to prevent the humans from succeeding. It was not enough. The humans had prepared for everything. For every Krath attack, there was a counter. For every boarding party, there was an ambush. For every weapon fired at the shuttles, there was a human ship ready to take the hit. They are using their own vessels as shields, Lysara whispered in disbelief. She watched a human destroyer move directly into the path of Krath missiles aimed at a shuttle full of rescued slaves. The missiles struck the destroyer instead, tearing through its hull. 13 crew members on that ship, the red-haired officer said quietly. 13 humans who just gave their lives to save 300 aliens they have never met. Lysara felt tears forming in her eyes. Why? Why would they do that? The officer looked at her with an expression she did not understand. Because someone should, ma'am. Because if we do not stand up for the helpless, who will? The battle raged for hours. Lysara lost track of how many ships were destroyed, how many lives were lost on both sides. But through it all, the evacuation continued. One by one, the slave stations were emptied. One by one, the stolen species of the galaxy were freed. When it was finally over, the human fleet had lost 40 ships. Thousands of soldiers had died, but more than 2 million slaves had been rescued. Commander Webb appeared beside Lysara. His face was pale with exhaustion, but his eyes were steady. The Krath fleet is retreating to their homeworld. They are fortifying their defenses. They think they can wait us out. He paused. They are wrong. What happens now? Now, we finish this. The Dominarch, their leader, is on the surface. As long as he lives, the Krath will continue to be a threat. They will rebuild their slave empire. They will attack more innocent worlds. Lysara looked at the dark planet on the screen. You are going to invade. We are going to remove a cancer from the galaxy. Webb turned to leave, then stopped. You should know something, Elder. Before we begin the assault, we will broadcast a message to the Krath population. We will tell them that any civilian who surrenders will be treated humanely. We will tell them that this is not a war against their species, but against their leadership. Will they believe you? Probably not. The Dominarch has spent generations telling his people that aliens are monsters who want to destroy them. He has built his entire empire on fear and hatred. Webb sighed. But we will offer mercy anyway, because that is who we are. That is what separates us from them. He walked away, leaving Lysara alone with her thoughts and the image of the Krath homeworld. burning on the screen. The humans were about to do something terrible, something violent, something that would end millions of lives, and somehow, impossibly, Lysara was beginning to understand that it was also the kindest thing they could do. The human assault on the Krath homeworld began at dawn. Lysara watched from the resolute as thousands of dropships descended. Through the dark atmosphere like falling stars, anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky below, creating a deadly web of light that the human pilots somehow navigated without hesitation. The Krath had fortified their capital city with every weapon they possessed. Massive cannons pointed at the sky. Energy shields shimmered over important buildings. Soldiers filled the streets, ready to fight to the death for their empire. None of it was enough. The humans did not attack the way the Krath expected. They did not come in waves, throwing bodies at defensive positions until they broke through. They did not bomb the city into rubble from orbit. They did not use the terrible weapons that Lysara had heard humans possessed, weapons that could crack planets and boil oceans instead. They came with surgical precision. Small teams of human soldiers dropped behind enemy lines, cutting communication cables and sabotaging power stations. Sniper teams took position on tall buildings, eliminating Krath commanders before they could give orders. Engineers disabled defensive systems from underground tunnels that the Krath did not even know existed. The Krath military began to collapse, not from overwhelming force, but from 1,000 small cuts. Commander Webb had invited Lysara to observe from a command center on the planet's surface. She stood in a ruined building that human soldiers had secured, watching tactical displays that showed the progress of the assault. "I do not understand," she said. "You have the power to destroy this entire city in minutes. Why are you taking so long? Why are you risking so many of your soldiers' lives?" Webb pointed at one of the displays. It showed a section of the city that had not yet been touched by fighting. In that section, Lysara could see thousands of dots representing life signs. "Civilians," Webb explained. "Krath families who have nothing to do with their government's crimes. Children who have never hurt anyone. Elderly citizens who just want to live in peace." He looked at her with tired eyes. "We could destroy this city easily, but we would kill hundreds of thousands of innocents along with our enemies. That is not victory. That is massacre. But the Krath would not show you the same mercy. They would not. That is why we are better than them." Soldier approached with an urgent message. Webb listened, his expression growing darker with each word. "The Dominarch has barricaded himself in the central palace," he told Lysara. "He has taken hostages. Important hostages. Your people. No, his own people. Krath nobles and their families. He is using them as shields, betting that we will not risk killing our enemies, civilians, even to reach him." Lysara felt a chill run through her scales. "He knows you too well." "Yes, he does." Webb began moving toward a waiting transport. "But he has made a mistake. He thinks our mercy is weakness. He thinks that because we care about innocent lives, we will hesitate. He thinks he can wait us out, can he?" Webb smiled grimly. "No, because we did not come here with hope for peace. We came here with certainty of victory. There is nothing he can do that we have not already planned for." The transport carried them closer to the central palace. Along the way, Lysara saw things that confused her expectations even further. Human soldiers were distributing food and water too, Krath civilians who had surrendered. Medical teams were treating wounded enemies alongside their own injured troops. Translators were speaking calmly to frightened families, explaining that they would not be harmed if they cooperated. But she also saw the other side of humanity. In areas where Krath soldiers continued to fight, the humans were merciless. They moved through defensive positions like water through cracks, peering from unexpected directions, striking before their enemies could react. Bodies lay in the streets, and none of them wore human armor. One moment a human would be offering candy to a scared child. The next moment, that same human would be putting a bullet through a Krath warrior's skull. The contrast was almost impossible to process. They reached a forward command post near the palace. Human officers were gathered around holographic displays, planning the final assault. The palace was a massive structure of black stone, bristling with weapons and surrounded by the best soldiers the Krath had left. And somewhere inside, the Dominarch waited with his hostages. "We have a problem," one of the officers reported. "Our infiltration teams have confirmed that the Dominarch has access to a dead man switch. If his heart stops, it triggers a signal that will activate sleeper weapons hidden on over a dozen worlds. Planet killers aimed at the homeworlds of species that the Krath have enslaved." Lysara felt her blood turn cold, including my world. The officer hesitated, then nodded. "Including yours, Elder." Webb studied the display in silence. Around him, his officers waited for orders. The fate of millions rested on his next decision. "Options," he asked. "You could pull back, negotiate, give him what he wants." "What does he want?" "The same thing all tyrants want. Power. He wants us to leave and never return. He wants to rebuild his empire. He wants to go back to enslaving the galaxy." Webb shook his head slowly. "That is not going to happen." "What else?" "We could try to disable the dead man's switch remotely, but our hackers say the encryption is too strong. We would need physical access to the device itself, which is in the palace." "With the Dominarch?" "Yes, sir." The room fell silent. Lysara could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. This was it. The decision that would determine whether humanity's intervention had been salvation or catastrophe. Webb looked at the palace on the display. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were calm. "Tell me about the hostages." "Approximately 200 Krath nobles and their families. They are being held in the throne room with the Dominarch, our infiltration teams. Standing by in the lower levels, they have mapped every corridor, disabled every internal security system, and identified every guard position. They are ready to move on your command." Webb nodded slowly. "Then here's what we are going to do. Signal all teams to prepare for simultaneous breach. I want every entrance to that throne room hit at the same time. Zero warning. Zero hesitation." One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, the hostages, ... will be protected. That is why we trained for this. That is why we are here instead of some other species." Webb looked around the room at his soldiers. These people came from a death world. Their bodies were forged in an environment that would kill most species in minutes. Their ancestors survived by being faster, stronger, and smarter than everything that tried to eat them. They do not miss. They do not hesitate. And they do not let innocent people die if there is any possible way to prevent it. He turned to face the palace one last time. "The Dominarch thinks he understands us. He thinks he has calculated our response. He thinks that because we value life, we will choose to preserve it at any cost." Webb's voice hardened. "He is wrong. We value life enough to risk our own protecting it. We value life enough to become monsters so that others can remain innocent. And we value life enough to end anyone who threatens it. No matter how well they hide behind their shields." He gave the order. "All teams, execute." The assault began. Lysara watched through surveillance feeds as human soldiers poured into the palace from every direction. They moved with inhuman speed and precision, eliminating guards before alarms could even sound. They flowed through corridors like shadow, silent and deadly. In the throne room, the Dominarch held his deadman switch and waited. Around him, hostages huddled in fear. Guards pointed weapons at every door. The doors exploded inward at the exact same moment. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Human soldiers came through the smoke, and debris like nightmares given form. Every guard in the room was dead before they could fire a single shot. The hostages screamed but were not touched, and the Dominarch, the ruler of an empire built on slavery and suffering, found himself staring down the barrel of Commander Webb's pistol. "The switch," Webb said calmly. "Hand it over." The Dominarch's scaled face twisted with hatred. "You would not dare. Kill me, and a dozen worlds burn." We disabled your sleeper weapons 2 days ago. Our teams have been on those worlds since before you even knew we were coming. The switch, Dominarch. Now. The Dominarch looked at Webb for a long moment. Then, slowly, his expression changed. The hatred faded, replaced by something else. Fear. Double quotes, how? He whispered. How did you know? Webb did not answer. He simply waited, his pistol steady, his eyes never blinking. The Dominarch dropped the switch, as human soldiers secured the device and began evacuating the hostages. Lasara approached the fallen tyrant. He was on his knees now, surrounded by the soldiers of a species he had dismissed as soft and weak. Why? The Dominarch? Asked Webb. Why do you fight so hard for species that are not even your own? What do you gain from this? Webb holstered his weapon and looked down at the creature who had caused so much suffering to so many, because someone should. Because you chose to make the galaxy cruel, and we choose differently. You see weakness in compassion. We see permission. The Dominarch did not understand. Lysara could see it in his eyes. The concept was too foreign. It's too impossible for a mind shaped by a culture of exploitation and cruelty. But she understood, and as she watched human soldiers lead the Dominarch away to face judgment, she finally began to see the truth about humanity that had confused her for so long. They were not kind. Despite their strength, they were kind because of it. Every species in the galaxy watched as the Krath Empire fell. The broadcast showed human soldiers accepting surrenders from Krath military units across 100 worlds. They showed slave processing facilities being shut down, their prisoners finally walking free after years of captivity. They showed the Dominarch being let in, chains to a transport that would take him to stand trial before a galactic tribunal. But the broadcasts also showed something that confused many observers. They showed human medics treating wounded Krath soldiers. They showed human engineers helping to restore power to civilian districts. They showed human diplomats meeting with Krath community leaders, explaining that this was not a conquest, not an occupation, but a liberation. The same species that had shown such terrible violence was now showing such unexpected mercy. Elder Lasara stood on the bridge of the Resolute as the fleet prepared to return home. Around her, human soldiers were celebrating their victory with quiet relief rather than loud joy. They hugged each other. They cried. They called their families on communication links, told them they were coming home. These were not conquerors reveling in destruction. These were people who had done something terrible because it needed to be done, were now trying to process the weight of their actions. Commander Webb approached her. He looked older than he had when they first met, as if the past few weeks had added years to his life. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, but there was a peace in them that had not been there before. Elderly Sarah, I have been informed that your world has begun rebuilding. The Villani government has asked me to extend their gratitude for everything humanity has done. They are not the only ones grateful, Lysara said. I have received messages from representatives of 30 different species. All of them want to know how they can repay you. Webb shook his head. We do not want repayment. We did not do this for reward, then why? I have watched you for weeks now. I have seen your soldiers kill without hesitation and then weep at what they have done. I have seen them show mercy to enemies who showed none to their victims. I have seen them sacrifice their lives for strangers they'd never met. Lysara spread her hands wide. Why do you do this? Webb was quiet for a long moment. He looked out at the stars beyond the observation window, at the vast darkness that held so many worlds, so many species, so much potential for both beauty and cruelty. When I was a child, he said finally, my grandmother told me a story. She said that long ago, before humans had built ships that could cross the stars, we lived in small tribes scattered across our dangerous world. We fought each other constantly. We killed each other over food, over territory, over things that seem ridiculous now. Many species have similar histories, Lasara said. But here is what made us different. Even in our most violent times, even when we were at war with each other, there were always some humans who reached out to help strangers. Healers who would treat wounded enemies. Warriors who would spare surrendering foes. Leaders who would share food with tribes that were starving? Why would they do that? It does not make sense from a survival perspective. Webb smiled. No, it does not. That is what makes it special. You see, elder humans learned very early that the universe is cold and cruel and does not care about any of us. We learned that if we wanted kindness to exist, we had to create it ourselves. We had to choose it again and again. Even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous, even when everyone around us was choosing cruelty instead. He turned to face her directly. That is why we responded to your distress signal. That is why we freed 2 million slaves. That is why we brought down an empire of suffering and death. Not because we hate the Krath, although some of us probably do. Not because we wanted their territory or their resources. We did it because we chose to be kind in a universe that is not. And kindness sometimes means protecting the innocent with extreme force. Lysara thought about everything she had witnessed. The violence and the gentleness. The destruction and the mercy. The terrible things done by the same hands that now offered comfort. Will the Krath face justice? She asked. Yes, the Dominarch and his commanders will stand trial. Every species they have wronged will have a voice. Evidence will be presented. Arguments will be heard. And at the end, a verdict will be reached not by humans alone, but by a tribunal representing the entire galactic community. And if the tribunal decides on mercy, if they choose to show the Krath the same compassion that you showed to their civilians, Webb nodded slowly. Then we will accept that decision. Justice is not the same as revenge. Elder, we did not fight this war to punish the Krath. We fought it to stop them from hurting anyone else. If the tribunal believes they can be stopped without further punishment, then our mission is complete. You are remarkable beings, Lysara said. Terrifying and remarkable. We prefer to think of ourselves as hopeful beings, Webb replied. We believe that one day the galaxy will not need species like us. One day everyone will choose kindness because it is right, not because someone is standing behind them with a weapon. Until then, he shrugged. Until then, we will be the ones standing behind the bullies with weapons. And the bullies will learn to find something else to do with their time. Months later, Elder Lysara traveled to Earth. She had expected a world of warriors, a planet covered in military bases and weapons factories, a civilization dedicated to the art of violence that she had witnessed. Firsthand, what she found was something entirely different. The human city where she landed was filled with color and life. Buildings stretched toward the sky, their surfaces covered in plants and flowers. Parks spread between them, green spaces where children played and families gathered. Music drifted through the streets. A dozen different styles mixing together in joyful chaos. She walked through a marketplace, where vendors sold food from every culture on Earth. She visited a museum where human history was displayed honestly, including all the terrible things they had done to each other over the centuries. She sat in a garden and watched elderly humans feed small birds that landed on their hands, without fear. And everywhere she went, she saw the same thing. Humans laughing. Humans helping each other. Humans being kind for no reason at all, except that they chose to be. A small child approached her in the garden. The child was young, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with bright eyes and a smile that seemed to contain all the innocence in the universe. Are you an alien? The child asked. Yes, I am called Villani. Cool. The child pulled something from their pocket. It was a flower, slightly crushed but still beautiful. Here, this is for you. My mom says we should always give flowers to new friends. Lysara took the flower carefully. Her hands were shaking. Thank you, she said. It is beautiful. The child grinned and ran back to their parents, who waved at Lysara with friendly smiles. She stood there for a long time, holding the flower. Thinking about everything she had learned, the Villani had always believed that kindness meant softness. They had thought that to be gentle, one must be weak. They had assumed that violence and compassion were opposites, that you could only have one or the other. Humanity had taught them otherwise. Kindness was not the absence of strength. It was the choice to use strength for good. Compassion was not weakness. It was the courage to care about others even when it was dangerous. And mercy was not foolishness. It was the hope that even the cruel could one day learn to be kind. The humans had not responded to the Villani distress signal with kindness in the way Zara had expected. They had not come with soft words and gentle promises. They had not negotiated or compromised or tried to find peaceful solutions with monsters who understood only cruelty. Instead, they had come with fire and steel. They had come with violence and death. They had come as nightmares made flesh, as the thing that monsters feared. But they had done it for the right reasons. They had done it to protect the innocent. They had done it because someone had to, and they had decided that someone would be them. That was human kindness. Not soft, not weak. Not naive, but real. Lysara looked up at the blue sky of Earth, at the clouds drifting peacefully overhead, at the sun shining warm and bright on a world that had somehow produced both the gentlest caretakers and the most terrifying warriors in the galaxy. "Thank you," she whispered to no one in particular. "Thank you for being who you are." Somewhere across the galaxy, freed slaves were building new lives. Oppressed species were finally knowing peace. And the dark empire that had cast its shadow over so many worlds was nothing but ashes and memory. Because when the Deathworlders of Earth had responded to that desperate signal, they had not come with kindness. They had come with something better. They had come with justice. With the promise that no matter how dark the universe became, there would always be someone willing to light a fire. And sometimes that fire had to burn.